Today, we're going to apply the last video's thinking system to the Grandmaster's games. This is a blitz game played between Ding Liren and Hans Niemann. I figured since most players are playing with instinct in blitz games, this is a perfect example to explain the Grandmaster's mind. So the game begins with an Italian opening. Both sides are blitzing out moves, and we get the move queen to d7. Now, black's bishop can be taken at the moment, but you don't really want to spend 2 tempi developing a knight towards the center, only to trade off this terrible bishop which is blocked by its own pawn. So, Hans made a decision. He played the move bishop to b3, and after Ding moves the bishop away, he played the move c4, trying to consolidate this knight on the d5 square. So, with the pawn structure being defined, it is time for us to take a closer look at this critical position. Both sides' minor pieces are sort of in their most desired square, but it is white who hasn't castled yet. This means that we have the static advantage, and it is time for us to go for the dynamic approach. If you're looking for a pawn break in this position, which ones are you going to consider? We mentioned before that we should aim for the most advanced pawn, which means here we should consider this e pawn and the c pawn. So, some moves would be c6 and d5, or maybe just f5 to pawn break the e pawn. And here, if we want to move the c pawn, we need to move this knight. But if we move this knight to the e7 square, this means that white can just take on f6 and damage our pawn structure. So probably the pawn push we should be aiming for is this move f5. Now that we have our plan, it's time for us to consider the executions. If we relentlessly take this knight on the d5 square, then after pawn takes, we will just fork our 2 pieces. But if we play a move like knight to g4, gaining a tempo on white's good bishop on the e3 square, f5 will be possible in the next turn, so probably knight to g4 is the best move in this position. So Ding played the move knight to g4, and Hans do recognize the threat of f5, so he decides to castle immediately without losing any tempo. However, he did leave behind this good bishop on the e3 square, so Ding just takes it. But after f takes, Hans is claiming that with this pawn on e3, it is controlling this key square on the d4 square so that black's knight cannot get into the center anymore. With the pawn structure changed again, we have entered another critical position. The question is clear, should we play the move f5? It seems that after f5, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, and even with a simple move like e4, we have done nothing but helped white get rid of his doubled pawns. But if we cannot play f5, what else can we do? Well, remember the knight e7 and c7 idea that we had earlier. Without the knight on f6, white cannot just take on f6 and damage our pawn structure anymore, so it is time for us to execute this plan. However, if you only calculated knight e7 and c7, you have once again missed the last stage in the ESC model. Here, after Ding played the move knight to e7, Hans sees the initiative that the knight has moved away from the center and played the move d4 immediately. And if we did not foresee the move knight to g6 to guard this pawn on e5, then knight to e7 is a terrible decision from us. Now, knowing that c6 is coming, Hans played the prophylactic and tricky move knight to c3. The idea is simple. He wants to play d5 to trap black's bishop. So Ding played the move queen to e7. White would love to play the move knight to d5 to attack black's queen again, but after bishop takes knight, e takes knight, the e-file is kind of opening and the white's king is exposed on the g1 square. So back in this position, Hans played the move king to h1 as a sort of a waiting move. Ding continues with this idea, c6, and Hans played the move queen to d3, hoping to bring his last piece into the game. Seeing that white is almost finished developing all his pieces, is it finally time for us to go for the pawn break f5? Well, the goal of the pawn break is to create space for our pieces to further develop, but if we already knew that after f5, e takes f5, bishop f5, and e4 doesn't really bring us anything, we shouldn't just play it anyway. And with that being said, if we take a step back and look at this position, we'll see that our previous c6 advance is actually another dynamic approach. It has brought space for our dark square bishop to further develop, and we should utilize this static potential that it has brought us. So, we got queen to d3, bishop to b6, rook d1, rook d8, d5, bishop to c8, and after the trade, bishop to a4, queen c7, b4, and a6, freeing up a square for the dark square bishop so that when c5 comes, he doesn't have to go to the a5 square anymore. After bishop to b3, it is clear that only this bishop and this queen is not fully developed yet. So, we want to bring our bishop to the e6 square, but we are afraid of this knight to g5 move, so Ding played the move h6. After knight g1, bishop to e6, knight g to e2, Ding played the move queen to a7, bring the last piece into the activity and eyeing on this weakness on the e3 square. To defend this pawn on e3, Hans had to play this awkward move rook to f3, but this just gives black another tempo by playing the move knight to h4, and after rook to g3, it is finally time for us to play the move f5. Now, this is actually a perfect opportunity to test your calculation skill. In this position, it seems that black has prepared everything to go for the move f5. However, this does leave a weakness, which is this bishop on e6 is currently hanging, and there's a way to exploit this weakness. But I have to warn you, black is threatening to trap white's rook on the g3 square, so if you're interested, pause this video and come up with a tactical plan for white. So, Hans did find the right approach. He played the move knight to a4, attacking this bishop on the b6 square, and if queen decides to recapture, then here comes c5, attacking this queen and also this bishop on the e6 square. Ding played the move f4, but Hans just took this bishop, and this is actually a blunder. After f takes g3, h takes g3, and even if Ding decides to recapture on b6, then after c5 and the line, you'll see that this queen on the d3 square is attacked by the rook on the d8 square, so white doesn't have the time to recapture this knight, and thus he is losing material. So this is a miscalculation by Hans. The nature of this position is to recognize that f4 is not a threat, but the attack on g3 is actually real. After f4 and e takes f4, knight takes f4, you'll see that black's rook cannot recapture on the f4 square because now after the line, with the rook on f4, this rook on d8 is pinned, so this attack on the queen and the attack on the bishop is now real. So black is losing material in this position. And in the game, Ding didn't even bother taking this knight on the b6 square. He just went to e7 and hoped that he could just recapture this knight with the queen. After takes, king g1, queen f2, king h1, and bishop to g4, with the open f-file and an active bishop on the g4 square to pin this knight, the game is already over. Hans tried to move rook to d2, but this just gives away the back rank, and after rook to f2 and some more moves, he has to give up his queen, and the position just seems very desperate for him, and here he decides to resign. And I just want to take another opportunity to emphasize on Ding's style. It really is just that simple, to delay the only f5 pawn break until every piece is fully developed. As we mentioned in the thinking system, develop to attack, attack to develop.